Despite me telling him to get in the shower an hour ago, my fiance just decided to get in the shower, which is on the other side of this wall, so if you hear any noises, just ignore them, they're not important. It's just life. Once again, I do not live by myself, and you might hear noises in the background. Also, Penny has a new toy, so she's really into it. Welcome. If you're new, welcome back. If you're not, I'm getting better at that, because normally I fuck it up, so, I think we're good. Today's True Crime Tuesday is a little bit different than what I've done in the past, because this one, the victim, we don't know who it is. So if you don't know who the victim is, you can't really find out who the killer is, which is an added issue, right? Today's case that we're going to talk about is the Lady of the Dunes, a Jane Doe that was found in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Lady of the Dunes. I stumbled upon this case while I was looking for something else, and then I decided it was interesting enough for me to dig deeper, and then once I started digging deeper, of course I had to just finish it and figure out, come to the point, figured out how deep I could get on this one. That sounds dirty. That's what she said. We had lemon to our water, and it's trying to kill me. So of course, Reddit saw this one first, and I am trying to keep up with all the comments this one's getting. There's a lot of information going on with this one, a lot of stuff that I didn't even think about. Lady of the Dunes, so many theories and no outcome, no answers, because there's so many people who have tried to break this down. And one of the articles that I had read, Provincetown, Massachusetts, this is the only unsolved case that they have, which is crazy. So they've dedicated a lot of time in trying to solve this, and there's a ton of theories, but there really aren't any answers. And some of these theories are obviously more plausible than others, and some are kind of really far out. But I think openly discussing and trying to speculate what might have happened could maybe lead an opening to solving this case. So here's what I know. On July 26, 1974, a preteen girl was walking her dog at the Race Point Dunes. That's in Massachusetts. It's up near the Cape Cod area. Provincetown is it's at the tip of the scoop of Massachusetts. So in 2020, it was listed as having a year-round population of 3,664, so it's really small. And then my dummy brain did not realize, I didn't go through the whole thought process to say, this is a huge tourist area. And on season, some of the people on Reddit were saying that the population of this area can jump up to 60,000 based off of the tourists that come through this area. So you do, in this crime, kind of have to expect that maybe, there could have been somebody meandering through the area, because it was July, it was the on season, so it's just something to consider. Race Point Dunes, for reference, and there's actually a track there that has on All Trails website. Race Point Dunes, for reference, is described as sand, and more sand. Pretty views, but a challenging area to walk in. No shade, all sun, all loose sand. And it's really remote. And that was one of the points that got brought up, is this area is super remote, and you'd kind of maybe have to be a local to know about it, or it wouldn't have just been, little old me wouldn't know it was there unless, I read about it beforehand or had been there beforehand. So it wasn't just it didn't give me the vibe that it was a place that somebody could just stumble upon and be, right? So this girl, I've read 12, I've read 13, I've read 2 girls, so the story is kind of hit or miss on that one. But so the story goes was the girl was walking her dog in this area, and her dog ran off, and she followed the dog, and the dog found something. And the girl at first thought it was a dead deer on the beach. Unfortunately, though, it was the naked body of a woman who was laying face down on what appeared to be a beach towel. And at first, also, this girl thought that it was just a sunbather, but the amount of insect activity and just the scene itself, it obviously was not just a sunbather, it was a dead body. The body was kind of hidden in a brush or seagrass. It was about 15 feet away from the service access road. The road follows the backside of a campground, like I said beforehand. I'm assuming based off of the brush and the distance and the road itself and how kind of remote it is, the body was not visibly open to anybody who was just passing by. I think the only reason why this girl found the body was because her dog ran off and found it, was drawn to the scent of it. I don't think anybody, and I mean, I've seen pictures of the crime scene, which I'll include if you'd like to see them. It's not she wasn't out in the open. She was kind of hidden. She wasn't in the open if you knew where she was, but she was kind of hidden behind other things. One article I read described the body as serene, which I guess is a word you could use to describe it. I don't know if that's the first word I would use to describe the situation, but because she looked like she was sleeping or sunbathing, maybe that's why. Upon closer inspection, though, her hands had been cut off. One article I read stated that there had been piles of pine needles placed where her hands should have been. There's been a couple of interesting comments about that apparently pine needles are supposed to be a spiritual thing to leave there. So the intention behind that is either, and it seems like they were intentionally put there. They didn't just accumulate there by themselves. So my thought was either those were intentionally put there so that maybe a passerby wouldn't notice that her hands were gone, or alternatively, which is a much more hopeful option, was that they were put there for a spiritual reason by whoever killed her. And I've also read articles that don't mention the pine needles at all. So I guess there's three outcomes. Either they were put there to disguise the hands being cut off, they were put there for a spiritual reason, or they were never there at all. So that's just open to speculation. She had a large hole in the back of her head, the origin unknown. Most people believe it was from blunt force trauma, most likely. For reference, a chunk of the skull that was missing was about the size of a hand, and there was an 8-inch crack that runs across the top. I did read one, it was an article but had comments below it of people speculating what could have happened. Underneath that, somebody had, I guess, speculated that maybe she might have taken her own life and was left there. We'll get to there in a second, but also, so whatever aside, say she did take her own life, why would somebody go through the effort of cutting off her hands after she took her own life? Like, that just doesn't seem like something a loved one would do, right? So I mean, I have issues with that theory, but that's neither here nor there. That's just my own personal issues with the theory. The sand near her body was not disturbed, and it looked like there hadn't been any sign of struggle. But however, in a newspaper, I did see that it said that there were 2 sets of footprints and tire marks 50 yards away from the crime scene. Now, based off of that newspaper article and based off of other things I've read, I'm not sure if that's the case or if that was written and then they realized they weren't connected at all. So I don't know. There may have actually been those there, and after they decided they weren't relevant to the case anymore, they took those away. I mean, it's possible that those could have been the girls' footprints that found her, the girls' footprint that found her, and the tire tracks, I don't know if that was connected to anything at all. So, I mean, it was a service road, people would have been driving there. So, like I said, they may have been there in one of the original articles, and then when they decided it wasn't relevant anymore, they stopped talking about it. I don't know. The Doe herself appeared to be somewhere between her 20s and 30s. And I've seen up to 45, but most articles agree that she was between her 20s and 30s. She had long auburn reddish hair that was in a glittery elastic ponytail. I've also seen the word barrette, but she had her hair up. She was estimated to be 5 foot 6 inches tall. I've also read 5'8" and approximately 135 pounds. Her autopsy showed that she had very expensive dental work done, including 7 gold crowns, estimated between $5,000 to $10,000 worth, and some of her teeth had been removed after death. I'm not sure if the teeth that were removed were actual teeth or if they were gold-covered teeth, but because she still had so much expensive dental work, and I would assume that that would eliminate this being a robbery gone wrong. We also, on the Reddit page, talked about this being a potential trophy, people keeping people's teeth as trophies. Unsure, it kind of pulls into a later theory, but so she was missing some of her teeth. I don't know which teeth she was missing. I also speculated at one point that maybe she had like a very distinctive like gap or a very distinctive front teeth or something that would have been very obvious if they pulled this body and they found her teeth. So maybe they might have been pulled out because they were a distinguishing feature about her that somebody might have remembered. She had also been nearly decapitated, possibly from strangulation, and that also goes into the, if you found somebody who had, killed themselves, why would you try to cut their head off and cut their arms off? And she had also been sexually assaulted with a wooden object post-mortem. That's not something you do to somebody you love. That's a brutal slaying of somebody. According to the Doe Network, it was speculated that she had died between 10 days and 3 weeks before her body was found, but another article I read that came from Provincetown says that she may have been deceased for as little as 5 days, and the July heat and insect activity really accelerated her decomposition. So that I do not know the answer to. So it could have been up to 3 weeks. It could have been 5 days, but she had been there for at least a minute. Because of the apparent lack of struggle, I personally have 2 theories, and that's either that she was killed somewhere else and placed here, and that's what authorities believe, or that she knew her killer and was asleep when it happened. The second one I'm not so sold on. I think it feels odd that she would have trusted the person she was with that much. Her blouse was never found. Her jeans were folded up next to her head, and so was her bandana. Her blouse was never found. And I mean, they speculated because she was laying on the beach towel, and the way she was laying on the beach towel was the beach towel took up a whole space, and she was only on half of it, like she had a companion there with her. But at the same time, I don't know, just an internal feeling on that one, I don't feel like that's the case. But that's my personal opinion. I could be completely wrong. She was buried in a local Catholic cemetery in Provincetown with a marker that is inscribed as unknown female. For years after her body was buried, someone left flowers at the marker every July 26th, which was the day her body was found. The body, and that was an interesting point, I included that because it was literally stated in an article and then never talked about again. So I don't know if it was a police officer who was doing that, like maybe somebody who found her body, someone who, and you'll see there was a lot of respect given to this woman posthumously. Like you'll see the body was exhumed 3 separate times for various reasons. In 1980, it was for facial reconstruction data. In 2000, it was for DNA analysis. And in 2010, but I've also read 2013, they exhumed the body again to do a CT scan of the skull. And at that time, money had been raised to purchase her a new casket because her first one had rusted and deteriorated. So the flowers being left at the grave could be a clue to who did it, but also it could have just been something not nefarious at all, and like a police officer leaving her flowers. So the article didn't mention it like it was a clue or it was going to lead to any type of suspect. It just was mentioned that it happened. So that makes me believe they knew who did it, and it was just something nice that somebody was doing for her. As everything suggests, this mystery has been cycled through so many times and so many people, and there's still no conclusive answers that have been found. They have done a decent job of eliminating possible people who have done it, but as far as building up a case for who it is and who did it, not at all. So here we're going to go through all the case leads of like what they tried to do to solve this murder. There was a psychic that was called and she said that she knew the location of the Lady of the Dunes' missing hands, which she'd given some address of location of like where the hands were buried, and the police followed up on the lead, and a cellar had been dug in that spot a previous year, eliminating any possibility of evidence. I'm not sure when that happened in relevance to when they found the body. I also don't know if that's even like true or how real that connection was. In 1987, there was a woman who came forward about possibly remembering her father strangle a girl in Massachusetts in 1972, which is just an alarming thing to mention. I don't know what her relationship with her dad is, but it seems kind of off. The body was found in 1974, though, 2 years after she claimed to remember seeing her dad strangle somebody, and the body had not been left there for 2 years. So, I mean, either her memory was off or the timing was off, but it also is suspected that the Lady of the Dunes hadn't died from strangulation. She had died from the head injury. So that I don't think people put too much into that one just because it was off. A woman came forward about her missing sister, and I think this was a while ago because the sister had gone missing in 1974 around the Boston area. The body was exhumed, like I said before, but the DNA did not match, and the sister was also found alive sometime later. I did get a comment about another woman who does believe this is her sister, and they have not done a DNA match on it, but we'll get to that in a second. It was suspected at one point that the Jane Doe could be Rory Jean Kensinger. Kensinger was a missing criminal at the time. She would have been 25 at the time of the murder, and she had escaped jail in 1973, but DNA also ruled Kensinger out. There were 2 other missing women, Frances Ewalt of Montana and Vicki Lamberton of Massachusetts, who were also ruled out by DNA evidence. And at some point, this was written, like, this is from the detective's mouth. At one point, detectives stopped following up on missing persons leads unless family members could provide dental records. Because they were getting thousands of hits a year on people who thought it was their sister or their mom or their cousin. And for a while, I think they were looking into all of them. But then at one point, the lead detective on the case said, no, unless you get dental records, I'm not going to bother looking at this case. And he had said a very small percentage of people ever actually got back to him with dental work. Serial killer Haddon Clark confessed to her murder as well. He wrote a letter in 2004 saying that he knew the identity of the victim but refused to tell because police had mistreated him. However, Clark suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, and police doubted his confession, which, after thinking about it a little bit further, I don't know if paranoid schizophrenic or not, there was several things that pointed to him possibly knowing. Like, so before he wrote this letter, he had been drawing pictures of handless women face down on the beach with their clothes off. I'll have to double check that, but I mean, there was other signs that kind of pointed to Haddon Clark being the killer. And just because he has paranoid schizophrenia and his son or his grandson was like, no, don't believe him, it could have been him. That I'm not sure about. So he was actually an actual possible person for me. Police and several other articles I read suspected that the Lady of the Dunes may be connected to the mobster James Whitey Bulger. It was rumored that Bulger had been seen in Provincetown during July of 1974, and he was with a woman that meets the description of the Lady of the Dunes. And from what I've seen, that's the only connection, but after posting this, I did get a lot of feedback on that Whitey Bulger was very into the mob, which, I mean, I've only done like tertiary research on him. I don't know his whole story, but being in the mob, people really honestly thought it could have been him. He was known to mutilate the people that he killed. I guess cutting her hands off wouldn't have been that out of the realm for him to do. At first, I discredited him pretty quickly, but in hindsight, it might have also been him as well. So right now, for me personally, I've got two suspects that I think really could have been the case. From what I'm seeing, though, that's kind of the only connection that they have. Like, the only solid evidence that they have is that she may have been with him because she matched the description of a woman that they saw with him. And apparently Bulger was known to remove teeth from his victims, so also kind of up his alley. There's never been an official link between the two. Whitey was captured in 2011 after a 16-year stint on being on the run. He was killed in prison at the age of 89 in 2018. There was a lot of people who were hoping that family or other people who knew the situation would come forward now that he was gone. A lot of people don't think that, and then a lot of other people that I've seen talking about this say that Bulger was too precise for something like this, and so if this were going to be something related to him, it would have been one of his goons, not himself, who did this crime. Tony Costa was suspected for a little bit, but eliminated because he died on May 12th, 1974, and the body was discovered on July 26th. Would not meet the time frame. He was already deceased before she was found. And yeah, so there was a woman that came forward more recently, and this was shared to me on Reddit. Marianne Newsom came forward about her sister. So Patricia Newsom was younger than the Jane Doe. She was only 16. Then their estimated age gap, right? So they suspected that she could have been between her 20s and 30s. Patricia Newsom was 16 when she went missing. But otherwise, the description, where she was, and everything pretty much meets Lady of the Dunes. So it really could be her. The last thing I read, they were waiting on DNA comparison on that one, so I don't have the answer for that. Another interesting thing that I hadn't thought about or didn't know, there is a municipal airport at Race Point, and it's also super remote. You need to take a very specific road to get up there. It's not an area with casual foot traffic from the town. Nobody's like walking out of their hotel room to meander up to Race Point Dunes. That's not what happens. It's too rough of an area for, like, not people-wise, but too rough of an area terrain-wise for people just to meander up that way. There's an approximate 2.5 to 3 mile separation between the town and the top coast of the Cape Cod National Seashore. So if somebody killed her, they would have to drive her up there. Because of the lack of blood or the struggle, I would say, especially because her hands were cut off, like that's going to produce a great amount of blood. And I tried to look at the weather for this time period and see if it had rained, because then maybe you could speculate that she was killed and just like and maimed there. But the lack of blood really is interesting to me. So that, I'm unsure. There's also a great deal of talk, and I had left this out from my original synopsis, I guess, because I wasn't sure how to include it, and I wasn't sure how important it was. But it was speculated that Lady of the Dunes could have been a sex worker, and a lot of people felt that she wasn't because her dental work was so expensive. But who's to say that sex workers can't have, like, you could be making some pretty good bank and you might have a really nice dental work, right? So I didn't think that was fair to exclude that fact, but also it felt like a weird thing to try to include. So I guess Lady of the Dunes could have been a sex worker. That's information that's neither here nor there. But one of the things that came along with the fact that she may have been a sex worker is that this case feels a lot like a Gary Ridgway Long Island serial killer, sexually driven serial killers, right? It kind of came up that maybe very Gary Ridgway-esque, that she was a sex worker and he couldn't perform and he killed her, right? And then she was mutilated, her body was left, and I mean, we've seen that in... My thoughts were that this, and I'm not saying Gary Ridgway killed her, I'm just saying it's a very similar feel to it, that this doesn't feel like somebody knew her and then killed her. This feels like somebody was cold and calculated and knew how to handle a body so that they wouldn't get caught. What random person knows that, you know, DNA evidence could be underneath the fingerprints? He removed teeth. It's not, whoever did this, it was not their first rodeo. They knew how to kill somebody and they knew how to not get caught. And that's very much the vibe of this whole thing, right? Is that whoever did this knew what they were doing, at least for the most part. And to give them credit, they haven't been caught yet, right? People still don't. This happened in 1974 and people still don't know who she is. So I'm not trying to give this guy any type of credit, but at the same time, it worked. So that leads me to believe that he was an experienced serial killer and he had done this before. Who was the Lady of the Dunes? I don't know. That's the final answer. I don't know. I hope that through DNA evidence, think like 23andMe, we might find answers. Is it possible we'll ever know who this is, or is this just Provincetown's greatest mystery? I can't even think of anything that hasn't already been done in an attempt to solve this crime. I think this is one of those ones where the people on the case, the police force working it, and the detectives trying to solve this cold case have really given it their all. This is not like they threw it to the wayside and just, it'll figure itself out. No, this is definitely one where I think police have done everything they actually could do to solve it. And with that being the case, I don't know what else we can do to try to solve it, right? I think the Patricia Newsome, I'm very interested to see how that turns out. I really hope it is, well, I don't hope it is her, but I hope it is her so that this case can be closed, the family can get closure. But so once we identify who the Lady of the Dunes is, now you have to try to figure out who killed her, which is also the second part of the mystery. You couldn't even figure out who she was, let alone who killed her. And so I guess finding out who she is will at least give the family closure on that aspect of it, but it does not give the family closure on the whole of it all. The only other thing that I could think of that we could do to try and, well, not even just we, but like the community, the police, whatever, could do to try and solve this is probably impossible. But I had the idea that maybe we could go through every single mugshot taken from the U.S. between 1960 and 1974 and try to compare sketches and composites and provide an answer. I don't even know how long it would take. You'd be, with facial recognition technology as advanced as it is nowadays, I mean, you can make the task a little bit easier than trying to do it by hand, but there's a lot of unknowns in that equation. There's a lot of risks that you're taking. That what if it happened in the 1970s? What if there were no mugshot? Like, what if certain police departments didn't take mugshots? And you have to get nationwide cooperation to get those mugshots. I saw somewhere that people had speculated that whoever killed her cut her hands off because they knew or they suspected that she had a criminal record. So, assuming that she'd been fingerprinted for some other reason, right? So if she did have a criminal record, which maybe would point to her being a sex worker, she might have had a criminal record for that. Maybe whoever killed her knew she had a criminal record, and so they took her hands. That's where I was going with the mugshot thought of, if she had been arrested and had been fingerprinted, would her mugshot still be available? And could we use the composite drawings that we have and the CT scan to try and like mimic what her face would look like? Could we try to run that through a facial recognition program against the against the mugshot database and see if you got any hits? And then eliminate the people who weren't the right age or weren't in the right area or are still alive, obviously, and go from there. That would be a massive undertaking. In April of 2019, investigators were looking at other ways to examine her DNA and possibly find a link. Think 23andMe. There's been a little bit of difficulty in that, though, because the Lady of the Dunes was embalmed before her burial, which can harm DNA evidence. Just something to think about. So there's still work going on now in 2022. This case happened in 1974, so it's actually kind of crazy that they're still working on it. It's just slow going. I hope there's an update soon. I hope that I can come back and give a report that this has actually been solved. At least her identity has been solved, and then we can speculate as to what happened to her. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you guys next week with something new and exciting.